Today, we are going to continue our financial fire drill challenge. So, yesterday we kind of went over what this week is all about, what a financial fire drill is, and how we actually complete it. So, the rest of the week, we're going to go into different pieces of the pie. So, we're going to look at different aspects of your financial life, your financial plan that you need to have in place in order to check the boxes off to complete your financial fire drill. Okay. All right. So, today we're going to talk about the emergency fund. All right. So for those of you who may not know, an emergency fund is a separate savings account that is only for emergencies, just like its name. So it's not really a savings account, to save up for something. It's not really an investment. It is basically a self-insurance. It's like a self-insurance policy or a self-insurance account because this is the money that you're going to use when something happens that you were not planning for. Something happens that you need the extra funds for, right? So this is another way that we are going to keep emergencies or the unforeseeable from becoming financial strains, sorry, 1 second, financial emergencies, right? Because we talked yesterday how, like, when we have, family or medical emergencies in our life, the last thing we need is for them to be compounded by becoming also a financial emergency. So this is how we're going to safeguard. So again, the emergency fund is like a little built-in insurance policy. It's not to be seen as investments, and it's not to be seen as a savings account for other things. And we'll dive more in that. But why? So why do we want to have an emergency fund? Things happen, right? Life happens. And credit cards are not the way to catch yourself in an emergency. They cost way too much and they don't buffer that stress. They might alleviate that stress for the moment, but okay, I can get this on a credit card. But then the bill comes and that compounds that stress, right? When things happen, um, so when these things come to us and they happen in life, we want to make sure that we have a plan, a solid plan. We want to have the money in place that we can pull from and then that we can focus on the problem. So whether that problem is a medical issue, whether that problem is a car repair, whether that problem is a family, whether it's an immediate family or extended family, you need to travel, we want to be able to focus on the issue at hand, not on the money things. So let me ask you this. Do any of these things sound familiar to you? Have you heard someone say one of these things? Or maybe you've said these things yourself. How can we afford to take off work? Or how can we afford to lose a day of pay? Right? I can't afford to travel to see my mom or another family member that may be in trouble or in bad health, right? What do I do until insurance kicks in? What am I supposed to do without a car? And I'm sure you can finish this line of questions. They're all questions that people have asked. I've had clients ask them. I've had family members ask them. I've had friends ask them. When they get in a bind and there's an emergency, these are the questions they come to. So one thing that I want to communicate is that no matter what type of emergency you're having, it all relates to money. It may not be a direct money emergency, right? But it all influences or all is influenced by our finances. Okay. So when I tell my people, my clients, someone who asked me, all right, let's start this emergency fund. How are we going to start? So I advise a two-phase emergency plan. So the first phase is a starter emergency plan. And what that means is that everything stops, everything extra spending, extra investing, anything extra that we're doing that we don't need to be doing. Your lattes moment, if you've ever read, there's a book, I think it's Instant Millionaire, something like that. He calls it like the latte factor. So all the extra things that you're spending money on that you don't need to be spending money on needs to pause to build up your starter emergency fund. Okay. And then once that starter emergency fund, then we can allow some things back in as we continue to fund our fully funded emergency fund and as a budget line. Right. So with our starter emergency fund, some experts put a number on this. Some financial experts say $1,000. And in the past, I have also said $1,000 is a great starter emergency fund. But what happens is that as time marches on, $1,000 doesn't stretch as far as $1,000 used to stretch, right? So my new rule of thumb is maybe your starter emergency fund should be 1 month of expenses. So whatever your expenses are for 1 month, that would be a starter fund. And if it's an extremely high number or based on the expenses you have, we can adjust that a little bit. Like, okay, well, like your bare bones expenses, is another way to look at it. So we're not saying like a month of your income. We're not necessarily saying a month of your budget because we put things in our budget that aren't necessarily needs, right? So we say just like a month of your main expenses, your absolute expenses, right? And that's just a rule of thumb that I've been using. As I see some of my clients are like, they're like $1,000 really isn't a lot. Like that $1,000 doesn't give them a piece at all, right? So that's how we kind of develop that. So once we fully fund that starter fund, when we're stopping all the external, all the extra stuff, get that funded. For some people, for some of you might be like, oh, well, I'll just move $1,000 from this savings account into emergency savings account, right? Or my emergency money market, or wherever you're keeping your emergency fund, which we will talk about. Um, and you just earmark it, name it, and you're done. And that's fine. Okay. But then we want to move into a fully funded emergency fund. And what that is that's going to be your 3 to 6 months of expenses. Now, the reason there is a range on that 3 to 6 months, that can be a lot. Like 3 months to 6 months is double the amounts, right? That can be a big difference. But there's a lot of factors that are going to where you feel comfortable in that fully funded emergency fund. If it's going to be 3 months or 6 months, and that's going to be dictated by the job you work. It's going to be dictated by your lifestyle, not only your lifestyle, but like your life situation, kids, single, that type of thing, and also your health. If you have a lot of medical expenses or someone in your home does, then you may lean more towards the 6 months. So that's going to gauge your 3 to 6 month expenses. For some people, they do say to me, I've had people say, you know what, forget this. I want a year of expenses in my emergency fund. And while that is not a bad thing, we will differentiate a little bit of those funds inside that because you have those two pieces in there that we can kind of diversify that a little bit more. But generally, your fully funded, not your starter, but your fully funded emergency fund is going to be that 3 to 6 month spot where you feel comfortable, where you feel like and your spouse, if you're married, this has to be a joint decision. Because I've had spouses say, I'm good at 3 months. And the other spouse says, I want 6 months. So then you either split the difference at 5 or you go for the more amounts. Always err on the side of more when it comes to emergency fund, because it is that insurance. Even if you never touch it, it's that peace of mind that you're getting. And you want both of you to have that. All right. So I also encourage that when you're storing your emergency fund, when you decide where your emergency fund is going to live, it needs to be apart from all of your other savings accounts. It doesn't be tucked away in with your auto savings fund or your gifts fund, or maybe you're saving up for a house. Because when it does that, when it lives and it's shared space with other savings, it can easily disappear, meaning that it's super easy to, like, say you're saving up for a car and it's super easy to blur the lines on where that is. So we want it completely separate. Um, and a few other options, and I will talk about there'll be a guide today in the post, and the guide will include a couple of options that I include for or suggest on where to house that, because you want it to be liquid. And what I mean by liquid is you want it to be accessible when you need it. So if your car is in the shop, you don't need to be running to the bank and trading accounts and figuring things out and doing this in order to get that money, right? No, you want to be able to swipe a card, write a check. You want to have access to that money when you need it. But again, you want to be separate. Okay. Now, when we're talking to getting up to a fully funded emergency fund, if you're doing 6 months of expenses, that can be a decent amount of money. So, although a regular savings account is a viable place to keep it, there are some options that may help you earn a little bit more interest on that large chunk of sum. But remember, this is not an investment. The goal of this money is not to earn you interest. The goal of this money is to be insurance. Okay. So, this money is not being used to save for something else. So, it's not wrong to look at your options is what's going to give you best return on that money, as long as you're not compromising your liquidity for interest rate. Okay. And I'll go into more detail in the guide that you guys can grab today. All right. Looking at my notes, see what else we have, where we at in time. Okay. All right. We're almost at time, but make sure you have an emergency fund that is established correctly. And one so established correctly, and those that your loved ones know how to access when needed. Okay. Because you may not always be the one having to um, get access to that emergency fund. So yesterday we talked about how, one way to run emergency funds, well, multiple ways to run emergency fund, and multiple ways to run a financial fire drill. And one of those is identifying the loved ones who will need access to all this information, whether it's your spouse, whether it's a parent, whether it's an adult child. If you're a single mom, it could be a teenage child or it could be a friend. You need to find someone you trust that you're going to be able to operate this financial fire drill with, or at least identify where all the information is stored. And we will get into that not tomorrow, but the next day. We'll be covering our financial Let me pull it up here. We'll be looking at our emergency binder, and that's where a lot of this information is stored. And we can, I want, if you are in a situation where you don't have someone living in your home with you on a daily, that you can swap out those tasks that we talked about yesterday. And maybe you're looking for someone outside of your home. We're going to be writing out instructions and making extra careful that everything in our emergency binder is nice and clear for them. I did get a question on that yesterday, so I want to make sure that I clarified that a little bit. But at the end of the week, this will all kind of make sense as you go through all the days. All right. So you want to make sure that you have emergency fund established correctly, and that the ones you loved ones are taken care of, right? And that they knows where this information. So just a reminder, this is part of a 5-day challenge. So every day this week, I'll be going live and we'll be discussing an aspect of the financial fire drill, and how to prepare for that and what pieces that we need to put that all together. And then also in my group, it's a free group, Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise, a faith-based journey to do more, give more, and serve more. There will be a post that goes along with each day that will give you tasks and or resources to complete that phase of the financial fire drill. All right, guys, I will see you tomorrow.